Hey, hi guys, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. So, today I'm gonna show you something different. I will be doing some testing on the WCF services and see how that works out with FINT. So, previously, all the previous videos that I've done was doing gRPC testing, and for this time around, gonna do some WCF testing using FINT. Okay, first let me show you the WCF service that we are going to test. And this is what we have over here. This, you can see here there's a project WCF service, and then there's the console host for it. And if you look at the configuration file of this console host, ignore the this green stuff there. I installed some extensions, and yeah, it's not working well. But anyhow, so this is the configuration for our WCF service. As you know, a lot of people have complaints about this WCF. There's just too much configuration. But yeah, I mean, yeah. But once you get used to it, actually, it's pretty straightforward, and it's very configurable. Yeah, because of all the configuration, of course. But here I wanted to show you because so that we know what to expect when we look at this with FINT. So first thing is we look at the bindings. So we know that it has a basic HTTP binding, and it also has a NetTCP binding, and finally a WS HTTP binding. And then if you look at the metadata, I think it's somewhere, where was that? Here, and we are exposing an endpoint for the HTTP for the WSDL in this MEX HTTP binding, and we should be able to find that in this service in using this base address, since that is a MEX HTTP binding. Yes, and as for the service itself, it doesn't really do much. I think all the service does is it just echoes back the whatever it's getting, it's whatever it is receiving. For example, here, get data, where it's taking two values, string, an integer and a t, and then it just returns those. So we know that if we're calling the service, then if we're getting back the same response, the same values that we're sending the request, then we know that the service is working fine. So almost all of that is just returning back whatever it's getting from the request. So nothing, no logic in this WCF service at all. Okay, so back to our WCF service. So I have it hosted in a console application, and again, this is the config, and I've got that running over here. So this is my console host, and it's the service is up and running now. And let's see. Let's start our test. So let me open FINT here. And as always, we want to add a client. We want to create a client for that WCF service. So click on Service Clients over here, or from the dashboard, you can also click on Open List. And it brings you to the same list of clients where you can create some services. So you can see I've already created one for that. But well, just to make sure that our service is running, we know that it's hosted. There's a there's a MEX HTTP binding over here. So we know that if I open that in the browser, then it should display my my WCF service. So yep, so now we know that it's running because it's displaying this default page where it also gives you some ways to generate the client code. But as long as you get the service, you know that it's running. Okay, so let's take this and let's put that in FINT and make our client. So again, to make a client, the steps for creating a WCF client is the same as creating a gRPC client. So click on the Create button, And on the client type, select WCF, and let's just give it a name, my demo WCF Client, and we put in the address of the MEX binding, so the address of the WSDL. So you can put in directly the WSDL file, or you can just put in like this one, and then it will also find it will still be able to find the binding, or the WSDL file. I mean, so everything is there, and let's click go, and let's see. Okay, so now it's should be downloading the WSDL and creating the compile the client, generating a code and creating the client for it. So actually now it's here, so you can see my demo WCF client, and let's have a look at what's inside that. All right, so again, same as the gRPC client, the service panel is on the left, and here we have the name of the WCF service, and these are all the methods that were found inside. So actually there's quite a lot of this methods over here. So these methods are all just echoing the whatever is in the request. And of course, if you whenever you select a method, the request panel displays that method. So for example, this get data async method is the one we had looked at just a few minutes ago. This is the one that takes the integer value, and then another parameter is a string value. Okay, and then of course, if you make a call to that this is the request panel, and then if you make a call, then you get a response in the response panel, and then at the bottom part you have some logging, and there's also a chart over here to display the time it took to make that request. And the other part, here we have, if you click on the settings, let's ignore this bit for a while, and let's focus on the client configuration. And then before that, let's just say my this is mouse settings, mouse pointer. Oh, it's easier. I wanted to change my mouse so that it's easier for you guys to see, but can't seem to find the correct one, huh? Additional mouse settings, I think. Additional mouse options. Oops, alright, never mind. Okay, right, so sorry about that. I just want to change the mouse pointer. But anyhow, as I mentioned, when we had a look at the configuration file for this WCF service, we saw that it had basic HTTP binding over here. Let me just make it bigger. So you have basic HTTP binding, and then there's a NetTCP binding, and then there's the WS HTTP binding. And in FINT, so after FINT discovers that the client, you can see from over here, this is by default it has selected for you the basic HTTP binding with this name SVC1 basic, which is the one that that is how it's named, should be in the on the service. Basic HTTP binding, basic binding. And yeah, okay, sorry. So there it is. So SVC1 basic, SVC1 NetTCP. So it's the name of it is basically the service that exposes itself as using basic HTTP binding. And if you click on this combo in this drop down list, then we can see that it also detected the others. So there's the NetTCP binding with that address, which is in the configuration file, as you can see here, on this address, which uses the NetTCP binding. It's on this address, NetTCP localhost /foo, which is exactly this. And this custom binding. So this is the binding that was generated by the client to match the WS HTTP binding. This one right over here, SVC1 WS. Right there. So FINT is using the client, what's this? The WCF client for that was not the .NET Framework one, but the .NET 6 version one. So it's the .NET Framework client generator generates a WS HTTP binding, but for the other one doesn't generate that. It creates a custom binding, but that custom binding anyway it matches the WS HTTP binding. So nothing to worry about over there. So let's try it out. So let's try this methods. First, let's do the basic binding, and let's switch back over to main, and let's see. So again, if you want to call the method, just select the method, and then you can enter some parameters on the request panel. So click on the value. So it says value is an integer, and it gives us this numeric box where you can enter only integers. So I can click that up and down. And then also test is another parameter, and it's a string. So here I could also enter some string. All right, so now we have the values entered for the parameters of the get data async. So we have 3, and then this text, this string SDF. So let's invoke the service. So to do that, you just click on this send the request button over here, or you could also get that bigger one over there, whichever is more convenient for you. So let's click on this one. Well, and then as you can see, now we got back the response from the WCF service, and the green bar indicates that everything is fine, and the request took 43 milliseconds, and it sent us back this result with a 3-SDF, which is what we expect since the get data async get data method, which takes the integer value and the string. All it does is just it formats the integer and the string, and then this is what we get over here. So yep, so that worked out fine. So and over here in the log, we can see that we were calling the get data async using the basic HTTP binding, and it says 43 milliseconds over there. So let's click that again, and then it makes another call. Still basic HTTP binding on this address, and then this time around it's 13 milliseconds. Of course, the second one is faster. And let's try out the other bindings. So let's switch over to so now I have basic HTTP binding selected. Let's do the netTCP binding, and then switch back to main, and let's send other values, not just 3. I can click again as usual. I can click that, or I could also enter some numeric values. And here I could enter hello. Then let's click the run button. This time let's try the one on the upper left. Run. And then here we have now the new value. So 234 hello, and then it took 141 milliseconds. Let's run that again. Now it's 14 milliseconds. Of course, again, when we switch over to netTCP binding, the first request to that binding, to that service that use that binding is going to be slow, and because of all the initialization that goes on on the very first request. Second one is much faster, 14. So it's around 14 milliseconds around that. And if you look back to our chart over here, as you can see. So these are the 14 milliseconds that we just sent just now, and then this is the initial call to the netTCP binding. Yeah, so this method is pretty, it's pretty easy. It only takes 2 parameters. Let's have a look at the others that are a little bit more, say, complicated than this one. say for example this function get data, you get data using data contract, so which you can see it accepts one parameter called a composite type, but the composite type contains an array value, an array of strings, and then it contains a boolean value, and then an array of errors, which is a class called error details. And then there's a parameter for GUID value. I think this is a GUID, but it's in the client that generates the generated client. It's represented as a string. Then there's an integer value and a string value. And let's have a look at the error details that I have selected over here, because it's a class, so it has. So oh sorry, this is an array. So well, we can give it some. Let's make it. Give it 2 items. Alright, so in this one, the first one was generated as null. So this class has a date parameter, and then another, and then a string, which is an error message. Let's say it's just a string, so it could be anything. Cool. Right, and so this is a little bit more complicated, as you can see. Let's call it. So let's click on this run button, and yeah, it says the formatter threw an exception. There was the serialized. Okay, so I know this is because of this GUID value, and because we don't have a proper GUID value for this. So let's just set this to null for now, and let's call this again. Okay, and there you go. So we have, as I mentioned earlier, the service is simply echoing back whatever it receives from the request. So that we know that the service is working fine if we are seeing exactly the same, if the response is exactly the same as the request. Expand this array value so we know. Okay, yep. So there's no item there, and then the ones that we specified on the error details. So this is the string error 1, which is right there. And then the other one, the error message foo, yeah, which is right there. So yeah, it works fine. So here is a more complicated one, but in FINT, as always, it's easier because it's just easy to enter these values, because it actually it gives you this editor which and it allows you to enter always the correct value. For example, if this one is an integer, this one is an array, so FINT gives you this editor which allows you to specify the items in the array. And then now that you have that, and then now we know that this array is a string array, so if I click on one item of that array, so that is a string type, then of course I can enter some string values on each of this array values over here. And there's some random values there, and then click run, and oh, made a mistake, cannot be used. There we go, faulted. Let's switch over it. That faulted. Oops. Okay, so yeah, I don't know why there was an error on the NetTCP binding, but I switched over to the WS HTTP, the custom binding. It worked fine. Let's switch back to NetTCP, and let's call that again. Yep, yeah. So that binding really is failing now. I'm not sure what happened there. It's in the faulted state. Yeah, that's one of the things with WCF. Once it hits in the faulted state, then yeah, then you can't reuse it again. So pretty much, I think what we could do is let's try leaving the client and reopening that again. Yep, it says really it's in a faulted state. Let's go back there, and then let's try that NetTCP binding again. Sorry, that's the GUID value again. But it looks to be okay now. So Yeah, so after closing and reopening, closing the client and reopening it again, it worked fine. Let's add some more values over here. Yeah, and then let's call that, and then the app. So there's the array values that we have. We add some more on those error details over here. Send that again. Yep, and then we get back the 3 values over here too. This one is null. Okay, so one of the if you're a QA tester, so one of the you would want to test the service with some random values, of course, right? So you don't want to just input like valid integer values, or within always those good data. So you would always want to test that with random data, or also if you're a developer and you want to quickly enter some values over here. And there's this little button over here right on the upper right. If you click on that, you see that the tooltip says assign random values. If I click on that, you can see that it's assigning random values on the parameters. And depending, of course, on the parameters, if it's a string, then it will assign some random string, which is what you see that keeps on changing over there. But as well as the date, it also keeps on changing when you assign random values to it. Of course, date, integers, and everything. So if it's an integer, then it'll be a random integer value, as you can see over here. And yes, and of course, again, as I mentioned, the GUID value is generated on the client side as a string, and of course that will not work, and this will not work because this is not a valid GUID value. So we have to send that as null. And then, okay, let's try and send this over. And it faulted again. NetTCP binding keeps on faulting. Except the other bindings. But yeah, so, well, yeah, as you can see, works fine. So the other bindings work fine. We have custom binding that's working fine. I think if we switch over to the basic HTTP binding, it should work fine as well. Click on that. So basic HTTP binding is using it now, and that's working fine too. Let's give it some random values again. It's the GUID value, which is not allowing. And then we should get back the response again. Yeah, so this is the WCF support for FINT. So as you can very well see, it looks exactly the same as how you would test gRPC. So this would be the equivalent of the unary method of gRPC, where you send a request and you get a response. Yeah, and it can do basically the same. The way you operate is essentially the same. That's one of the benefit of using FINT, because if you know how to use it, let's say for gRPC, then you can also use it for WCF in exactly the same way, because it just works the same way. So instead of you using different tools and going through different learning curves, learning how to use those specific tools, since everything is in FINT, it supports both gRPC and WCF. You only need to learn one way of using the tool, and I think that's one of the nice benefit of having only a single tool. And before I go, one quick one again. I just saw the method, for example, here, abstract async, and you can see that for this method it takes an abstract class. So there's this icon over here to indicate that this function is taking an abstract class, and there's this dotted square around it. If you select that, then it gives you again this editor where you can select more concrete implementations of this. So because of course you can't send over an abstract class, let's click the send, and you can see here the error cannot create an abstract class. That makes perfect sense. So we have to create a concrete implementation of it. So from this one you can select either concrete 1 or concrete 2. And then now we have a concrete implementation, and then we send that, and then that gets sent over to WCF, to the WCF servers, and then we get back the response. So that's it. Let's change some values just to make sure that that's the one we're sending over. And we change some value as well on the concrete implementation. So concrete 1 int is 123. From the abstract class, we have this abstract int property, integer, which has a value 3. Click that, and that's what we get over here. So we know that it's working fine. So the request was sent over correctly, and then we got back the response. So it was just simply echoed back, and we see it right back over here. Yeah, and yes, that's it. So that's all. FINT supports WCF, and yeah, the way to use it is actually the same way as you would use it for gRPC. So pretty simple and pretty easy to use. And so that's it for this video, and I hope you like it, and try out FINT, and I will put the download link to FINT on the description of the video. Okay, thanks guys. All right, bye.